If the villain had a mother. Have you ever held a piece of paper that tried to erase you? Have you ever watched a child look at you like you're a thief, like you walked into their house wearing their mother's face? Have you ever realized the thing that hates you most isn't the person in the room, but the story that wrote them that way? And what do you do when the story is wrong, when the villain is 8 years old and already bracing for abandonment like it's weather? What do you do when a world that was supposed to be a soft, shiny romance starts collapsing like a poorly built stage? What do you do when you know the future, know the exact day a decision becomes a disaster, and you still have to smile at dinner like nothing's coming? What do you do when the audience is watching you live, waiting for you to fail because failure makes better training footage? What do you do when the child trying to get rid of you is also the child you're here to save? And what do you do when, for one impossible second, you catch yourself thinking she's adorable and you hate yourself for it because you know what she becomes in the original timeline? I stood in the Carter family living room with a DNA report in my hand, the kind printed on thick, clinical paper, stamped with an official seal, the kind people trust because it looks expensive. The chandelier above me threw a clean, cold light over everything. The marble fireplace, the wide windows, the framed photos of a father and daughter smiling in places that looked like postcard versions of life. Nantucket. Aspen. Some gala where everyone was dressed like success. I lowered my eyes and read the result again. Maternity probability, 0%. 0. Not unlikely. Not inconclusive. Not sample contaminated. 0 like a door slammed, like a verdict. My mouth twitched, not because it was funny, but because if I didn't laugh I might do something worse, like scream, or drop the paper, or let the ache behind my eyes become visible. In my peripheral vision, the little girl shifted. She was half hidden behind her father, peeking out from the safe shadow of his suit jacket. 8 years old, small, with hair pulled into two neat space buns like her nanny had watched a tutorial and taken it personally. Her face was smooth and pale, her eyes huge and dark and far too alert, as if she'd been awake for years. She watched me the way a cat watches a glass near the edge of a counter. Waiting. I rubbed my temple. That familiar pressure built, the start of a headache I knew too well. The kind that came when the timeline resisted me. My name, my assigned name in this world, was Morgan Vale. On paper, I was Morgan Carter, newly married to Ethan Carter, CEO of Carter Caldwell Holdings, a Boston-based conglomerate with fingers in tech, real estate, and defense contracting. The kind of company with a skyline of its own. The kind of company that turned people into headlines. But my real file sat somewhere no one in this world could access, in a place outside of time where paperwork didn't rot and lies didn't hold. I was an S-tier field operative for the Continuum Bureau. The Bureau didn't do heroism. We didn't do justice. We did stability. We went into compromised narrative worlds, storylines that were supposed to follow a track, and we corrected drift before everything crashed. This world had been classified as low risk. A contemporary romance. Bright and glossy. Predictable beats. The male lead fell, the female lead caught him, the secondary antagonist, the villainess, lost and faded. But something had twisted. In the Bureau's projections, the villainess didn't fade. She escalated. She erased the protagonists. She toppled the world. Like it was made of cardboard. Collapse risk, critical. So they sent me. Last mission before retirement. And because the Bureau loved its own propaganda, they turned the mission into a live broadcast for trainees, a real-time feed with commentary overlays, like a sports game where the stakes were an entire universe. The role they assigned me wasn't glamorous. They dropped me into the body and life of the woman destined to become the villainess's stepmother. I looked at the DNA report again, still in disbelief at the audacity of it. 0%. Even strangers share more DNA than that. Even humans and bananas, never mind. I lifted my gaze to the child again, and I saw it, the barely contained satisfaction, the tiny lift at the corner of her mouth. She thought she'd done it. She thought she'd found the one weapon that would make adults do what she wanted. She wanted me out. She wanted her father back. And in her mind, The fastest way to get there was to prove I was a fraud. Ethan finally reached for the report. His hands were steady, but his jaw tightened, a microscopic fracture in the mask of a man who made decisions that moved markets. "What is this?" he asked quietly. I handed it over without a word. He scanned the result once, twice. The air in the room shifted. Behind him, the girl rose onto her toes and leaned in, craning her neck. "Dad," she asked, voice sweet like she'd been practicing. "What does it say?" Ethan didn't answer her right away. That told me everything. He already knew. He didn't need a confession. He didn't need fingerprints. He'd been living with her long enough to recognize her patterns. Her sudden silences. The way she watched people like she was gathering data. The way she flinched when adults got too close, then acted like she hadn't. He exhaled, slow. Then he crouched to the girl's level, because he was the type of father who knew optics mattered, even in private. "Harper," he said gently. So that was her name in this world, Harper Carter. She blinked up at him, wide-eyed, innocent on the surface, calculating underneath. "What?" she asked, and even that single syllable sounded like a dare. Ethan touched her shoulder, a careful, measured contact. "Morgan isn't your mother from before," he said. "She's your mother now. Do you understand?" Harper's brow wrinkled, as if he'd told her the sky had been replaced. "Mothers can change," she asked. Ethan's mouth twitched in a sad smile. "Families can grow." "I don't want them to," Harper said. Immediately, too fast, too honest. Ethan didn't scold her. He just nodded like he'd expected it. "Okay," he said. "Then we take it slow. You try living with Morgan for a while. You decide what you think. Fair?" Harper's eyes flicked to me. She looked me over the way someone in a courtroom looks at the defendant. Like I was a threat and a riddle. I kept my face soft. I let the corners of my mouth lift, just slightly. The feed in my periphery glitched, commentary overlays sliding across my vision, translucent and fast. Chat, she's doing the smile thing. Bold. Chat, the kid smug. 8 years old and already terrifying. Chat, 0% is insane. That's not DNA, that's species testing. Chat, remember, villainous baseline. Don't get tricked by the cute face. I ignored them. I had to. Harper stepped forward, chin lifted like she'd been raised around boardrooms and believed she belonged there. "My name is Harper Carter," she said. "Dad says my mom named me. Do you remember?" This was the trap. If I said yes, I supported her fantasy that I was her biological mother returned from the dead. If I said no, I became the enemy who didn't even care enough to pretend. I measured the space between truth and survival, the thin line all mothers walk whether they admit it or not. "I remember the name," I said carefully. "It fits you." Harper narrowed her eyes. "What's your name?" "Morgan," I said. She stared at me like she was trying to decide whether that name tasted real. Then she turned and marched up the stairs without permission. Like she owned the place. Ethan stood and folded the DNA report in half, crisp. "I'm sorry," he said to me, voice low. "She's been through a lot." It sounded like an explanation. It also sounded like a warning. I nodded. "So have I said, but I didn't say it out loud. That night was my first night in the Carter house. The house wasn't just big. It was designed to remind you it was big. Long hallways that swallowed sound. Rooms no one used except to prove they existed. A kitchen that looked like a magazine spread and felt like a laboratory. There were 3 staff members on rotation. The head housekeeper, Deborah, handled schedules and etiquette like a drill sergeant in pearls. A driver. A cook named Marla who'd been with the Carters long enough to speak as if she were family. Deborah pulled me aside after unpacking. "Mrs. Carter," she said softly, "Harper has preferences. Food is a sensitive point. She can be difficult. Please don't take it personally." I thanked her. I watched her eyes when she said difficult. I filed it away. 2 days later, at dinner, I understood. Marla served a plate of pork pot stickers, glossy with oil. Steam rising in fragrant waves. Harper was already seated, hands folded, waiting like she'd been starved for days despite the fact she lived in a house that could have fed a small city. She picked up a potsticker and took a bite. For a second, she looked pleased. Then her face changed. It wasn't a tantrum first. It was shock. Disgust. A flinch that came from deep inside. Like her body had made the decision before her brain caught up. She dropped the potsticker. Her chopsticks clattered onto the plate. Then she shoved the entire dish off the table. It hit the floor and exploded into shards. The sound was violent in the quiet dining room. Harper shot to her feet, cheeks flushed, eyes bright with fury. "I told you," she yelled. "I told you I don't eat this. Why do you keep making it? It's disgusting." Deborah stiffened. The driver's eyes went wide. Marla rushed in, apron on, hands already lifted in apology. "Oh my God," Marla said quickly, looking at me, not at Harper. "Mrs. Carter, I'm so sorry. I'll clean it up. I'll." The feed flickered again. Chat, there it is. Future villain energy. Chat, she's 8 and she's slamming plates. Yikes. Chat, wait, she said I told you. Did she? Chat, staff sounds like they ignore her. I stayed seated. I watched Harper's hands. They weren't just angry. They were shaking. Anger was the surface. Underneath, I saw something else. Helplessness, the kind you get when you speak and no one listens until you explode. I spoke calmly. "Harper," I said. "You don't eat meat?" Marla exhaled like she'd been waiting for that question. "She's picky," she said. "Doesn't eat meat at all. Never has. But she needs protein, she's growing, and honestly, kids don't know what's good for them, so I try." Harper turned her head slowly toward Marla, and the look on her face could have cut glass. "I never said I don't eat meat," Harper said, voice low. Precise. "I said I don't eat potstickers with pork filling. I said it a lot." Marla blinked, annoyed now. "Harper, honey, you're being dramatic. It's food. It's not food if it makes me want to throw up," Harper snapped. Deborah made a small sound like she was about to correct her, to remind her of manners, to remind her that girls didn't speak that way. I stood up. I stepped around the broken plate and crouched in front of Harper, careful not to invade her space too fast. "Look at me," I said quietly. Harper's eyes flicked to mine. They were wet. She hated that they were wet. "Answer me," I said. "Do you eat meat and other things?" Harper's chin lifted, stubborn. "Yes." "Like what?" "Chicken nuggets," she said instantly. "Steak. Burgers. Dumplings if the wrapper is thin. Wontons. But these," she gestured at the mess on the floor like it was evidence. "These feel wrong. The wrapper is thick and sticky and the pork is," her face pinched. "It's like biting into a wet sponge." I nodded as if she'd just told me something totally normal, because it was. Then I looked up at Marla. "So you knew she didn't like these," I said. Marla's lips pursed. I knew she complained. Kids complain. If I cater to every little preference. "She's not complaining," I cut in. My voice stayed calm, but the air sharpened. "She's communicating. There's a difference." Deborah's eyebrows lifted, offended on behalf of the household order. "Mrs. Carter," she said carefully, "Marla has been with the family a long time." "So?" I asked. That single word landed heavy. I stood. I looked at Marla. "I'm not debating this," I said. "You're dismissed." Marla's face went blank. "Excuse me?" "I said you're dismissed," I repeated. "Deborah will handle payroll tonight. Pack your things." Deborah inhaled sharply. "Mrs. Carter." I turned toward her. "No," I said, not loud, but absolute. "Not Mrs. Carter. Morgan. I'm not doing the title thing with you. I'm not a porcelain figurine. I'm the adult responsible for that child when Ethan isn't here. And that means what Harper says matters." Harper stared at me like she'd never seen an adult take a hit for her before. Marla's mouth opened, closed. "This is ridiculous," she said. I was trying to help her. "You were trying to control her," I said. "There's a difference." Marla stormed off, muttering. The driver avoided eye contact. Deborah stood stiff as a statue, calculating. Harper didn't move. For a long moment, she just stared at the empty doorway where Marla had disappeared. Then she looked up at me, and the hardness in her face cracked into something small and young. So, she whispered, as if asking permission to hope, "I don't have to eat those anymore?" I crouched again. "Nope," I said. "Never again if you don't want to." Harper's breath hitched. She blinked fast. Then she swallowed, and her voice went tiny. Am I bad?" she asked. "Like, really bad?" The feed fizzed. Chat, oof. That line hurt. Chat, she's not a villain. She's a kid. Chat, don't get attached. It's mission drift risk. I ignored them. I touched Harper's shoulder, gentle. "No," I said. "You're not bad. You're smart. You know your own body. You spoke up. The adults failed you. That's not your fault." Harper's eyes filled anyway, because kids don't cry only when they're sad. They cry when they're finally safe enough to feel anything at all. She wiped her face angrily like she was mad at the tears. "Whatever," she muttered, and turned away. But when she walked out of the dining room, she walked slower than before. Like she was waiting to see if I'd follow. After that night, Harper started talking to me. Not a lot. Not warmly. But it was something. Before, she'd treated me like a decorative plant. If our eyes met, she'd scoff and turn away. Now, every morning before school, she'd pause in the foyer, backpack on, and say, like it was a chore, "I'm leaving." And I'd say, "Have a good day." And she'd nod like she hadn't needed that simple exchange more than she'd ever admit. I began to understand Harper quickly. She wasn't wild. She wasn't irrational. She wasn't some born monster. She was a child with a sharp mind and a clear sense of self-living. Inside a world that kept trying to sand her edges down. In the original storyline, those edges became blades. And the reason wasn't magic. The reason was loneliness. Then the school called. It was a number I didn't recognize. A clipped, professional voice. "Mrs. Carter? This is Maple Ridge Academy. There's been an incident with Harper." My stomach dropped before the details even landed. "What happened?" I asked. "She was involved in a physical altercation," the administrator said. "4 students were injured. Please come immediately." 4. My hands went cold. When I arrived, Harper was in a small office that smelled like lemon disinfectant and fear. Her hair was half loose, one bun drooping. Her sleeve was torn. There were scrapes on her arm and a swelling on her cheek. Across the room, 4 boys sat with their parents, 2 of them crying, one glaring at Harper like she'd ruined his life. A mother turned on me as soon as I entered. "I have never seen a child like this," she snapped. "A girl who attacks boys? What is wrong with her? What kind of home does she come from?" I held her gaze. Then I smiled, polite enough to be deadly. "So if she were a boy," I said, "this would be normal?" The mother blinked, offended. "That's not what isn't it?" I asked. The teacher stepped in fast, palms out. "Let's keep this calm. We're here to resolve the issue." I walked straight to Harper. I crouched in front of her, ignoring the blood pressure rising in the room. "Harper," I said gently, "tell me what happened." Harper looked at me for a long second. Her eyes were guarded, but there was something else there too, fatigue, like she was tired of explaining things no one cared to understand. "You won't get it," she said finally. "Try me," I said. Harper's jaw tightened. "If I tell you," she said, voice flat, "everyone's still going to say I should be nice." "Maybe," I said. "But I'm not everyone." The teacher cleared her throat. "Harper, you threw a bucket of dirty mop water on the boys while they were passing by. That's what started it." Harper's eyes flicked to the teacher, and something in her expression sharpened. "I told you," Harper said. "I told you they kept running through the hallway, pushing each other into people. They slammed into me twice." "Twice." The teacher's cheeks flushed. "I did address it. I told them boys have a lot of energy and I should be understanding," Harper finished, voice cutting. "Because I'm mature." Silence. Harper turned to me, and her voice got smaller, but it got clearer. "Why," she asked, "do I have to be the one who understands? Why do I have to be the one who's quiet?" If I was a boy, would you still tell me to be understanding? The teacher froze like someone had finally forced her to hear herself. One of the parents shifted uncomfortably. Another mother's face tightened. Embarrassed, a father grabbed his son's shoulders. You apologize, he hissed. The boy sniffed, eyes red, and muttered, sorry. Harper didn't look satisfied. She looked stunned. Like apologies were foreign objects in her world. I reached up and brushed Harper's hair back gently, the way you do with a child who's trying not to fall apart. Okay, I said. You made a point. But you used a weapon that could have gotten you suspended. Next time, you come to me before you choose chaos, understood? Harper's lip trembled. She blinked hard. Then she nodded once, sharp. I'm sorry, she said suddenly, to the room. I shouldn't have thrown the water. I shouldn't have hit anyone. The boys stared at her, thrown off by how fast she owned it. More apologies followed, awkward and stiff. The administrator exhaled, relieved to have a neat ending. But I knew it wasn't neat. Nothing about Harper was neat. That night at home, Harper sat on the couch while I cleaned her scrapes. Her shoulders were rigid, as if she expected the sting of disinfectant to be punishment. I dabbed carefully. I taped a bandage over a cut. Harper stared at the coffee table like it was safer than my face. Then, so softly I almost missed it, she whispered. Mom. My hand paused. Harper's eyes stayed down. I'm sorry, she said, voice cracking. I'm not good. I'm not a good kid. Something in my chest pinched hard. 8 years old, bruised, and apologizing for existing. I swallowed. You don't have to be good to deserve love, I said. You don't have to be easy. You don't have to be quiet. You just have to be you. That's enough. Harper's breath hitched. She fought the tears like they were enemies. They won anyway. She curled into my side suddenly, small and shaking, and the sound she made wasn't loud. It was the kind of cry that comes from holding it in too long. Morgan, the feed whispered in my vision. As if the bureau itself was leaning close. Mission parameters. Narrative integrity. Emotional entanglement risk. I shut them out. I wrapped my arms around Harper and held her like she was the only real thing in the world. After a minute, her voice came muffled into my shoulder. Why, she whispered, did you come so late? I closed my eyes. Because I wasn't supposed to be here. Because the story killed her mother on page 1. Because someone wrote her future like a punishment. Because the world thought she was expendable. Because the Bureau thinks love is a variable to control. Because the truth would break her. So I chose the only answer an American mother in a messy, modern life would give when there's no clean explanation and the child is shaking in your arms. I'm here now, I said. I'm not going anywhere tonight. Harper's fingers clutched my shirt like she didn't believe me. And in the quiet after her crying slowed, I stared past the living room window into the dark Boston winter sky and felt the timeline shift, just slightly. Because somewhere ahead, months, years, there was a moment the original story called destiny. A meeting. A boy. A chain reaction. A kidnapping. A bullet. And Harper, in that version, would mistake trauma for love, scarcity for fate, and would break herself trying to earn a place in someone else's life. Not if I could help it. Not this time. Not while my hands were still warm and my heart was still mine. After that night, Harper changed in small ways most people wouldn't notice. She didn't suddenly become cheerful. She didn't turn soft or obedient. She didn't hug me in public or start calling me mom without hesitation. She was still sharp, still guarded, still a little too aware of how easily things could be taken away. But she stopped bracing for impact every time she spoke. She started telling me things before they exploded. If she didn't like something, she said it. If someone upset her, she told me instead of swallowing it whole. Sometimes she was blunt to the point of rudeness. Sometimes she tested boundaries just to see if they would hold. I let them hold. Ethan noticed the difference before he admitted it. He started coming home earlier. Not every day. Not dramatically. But more often than the story said he would. He asked Harper about school. He sat at the table longer. He listened instead of checking his phone every 10 seconds. One night, after Harper went to bed, Ethan stood in the kitchen and stared at the sink like it had personally offended him. "I didn't know," he said finally. "I didn't ask what he meant. I already knew. I thought," he continued, rubbing a hand over his face, "that providing everything else was enough. Stability, education, opportunities. I didn't realize how quiet she'd become." "You were busy surviving," I said. "That doesn't make you a villain." He laughed weakly. "According to the internet, it probably does." I didn't laugh, because I knew what the original version of him became. A man who remarried. A man who tried again with new children. A man who loved Harper in theory, but failed her in practice. That version of Ethan was already weakening. Then came the weekend. Ethan cleared his schedule completely, no assistance, no calls, no board meetings, and took Harper and me to a newly opened amusement park outside the city. It wasn't extravagant by Carter's standards, but to Harper it might as well have been a miracle. She talked nonstop in the car. About rides. About cotton candy. About how tall she was now. About nothing and everything. Her voice filled the space like she was afraid silence might take something away. At the top of the Ferris wheel, when the city lights looked soft instead of sharp, Ethan turned to her, serious. "Harper," he said, "I haven't been a good dad." Harper froze. Adults didn't usually say things like that to her. "I missed a lot," Ethan continued. "I thought I was doing the right thing. I wasn't. I'm sorry." Harper stared at her shoes. "I don't want to miss you anymore," he said. "Will you let me try again?" For a long moment, Harper said nothing. Fireworks exploded outside the park, unexpected, loud, beautiful. The light reflected in her eyes. Finally, she nodded once. "Okay," she said. "But you have to actually be there." Ethan swallowed. "I will." Harper turned to me. "And you," she said, suddenly serious. "You don't disappear. Either." I leaned down and kissed her forehead. "I'm not leaving," I said. "I promise." That night, I told her a story before bed. Not the sanitized version of The Little Mermaid that ends in tragedy for romance's sake. I told her the original myth. The one about choice. About pain that wasn't rewarded with love, but with growth. About a girl who endured the consequences of her decisions. And, in doing so, created something permanent inside herself. Her soul didn't come from a prince, I said. It came from her own resolve. Harper listened like she was memorizing it. "I like that one better," she said. Years passed. Harper grew. She became taller, louder, more confident. She learned to argue without exploding. She learned to ask for help without shame. She learned that anger could be information, not a weapon. Ethan stayed. The story adjusted. And then, right on schedule, the Bureau's commentary flared again. Middle school. New transfer. Student. Wealthy family. Future male lead. The encounter that wasn't supposed to be avoided. The day that marked the beginning of obsession in the original timeline. My hands shook when the alert hit. I didn't wait. I called Ethan. I called the police. I drove. When I arrived at the abandoned building, the situation was already spiraling. 2 kids. 1 gun. 1 mistake away from a rewrite. I couldn't undo. I didn't think. I moved. The shot rang out. I felt cold. Then nothing. And then memory. Not Morgan. Not an operative. I remember dying in a hospital room years ago. Blood on white sheets, holding a name in my mouth like a prayer. Harper. I woke up to antiseptic and sunlight. Harper was asleep at my side, face swollen from crying. Ethan sat slumped in a chair. His suit wrinkled, his eyes red and hollow. Above them, a familiar white ring hovered, silent and watching. Mission complete, the voice said. Narrative stabilized. I ignored it. Harper stirred. She looked at me, and then she broke. "Mom," she cried, like the word had been waiting her whole life. I pulled her into my arms. "I'm here," I said. "I know. Later." When the ring faded, when the feed cut out for good, when the bureau marked my file closed, Ethan looked at me and laughed through tears. "So, I was really going to mess this up, wasn't I? I smiled tiredly. Not this time. Harper ran toward us, ice cream in hand, sunlight in her hair. I held them both. The story was finished. But her life wasn't. And this time, no one else would write it for her. The end.